Hi, this is John Genkos talking, and this is Paul Levy's Beth Israel case study. This is for Professor Goodman's class. Professor, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity this semester, and I really appreciate the case studies. They were really informative, and they taught me a ton. So I just want to let you know that. A little background on Paul Levy. He was the Executive Dean of Administration at Harvard Medical School before he took this job, known as a great negotiator. He had 3 degrees from MIT, which we all know isn't easy. And he took over the DPU and also upgraded the water system and cleaned up the Boston Harbor, which we know, living around Boston, that's not an easy project. A little background on BI Deaconess Medical Center, which I'm going to be calling BID for this whole project. In 2000, they lost $52 million, and in 2001, they lost $67 million. There was a fear of losing $102 million the next year without dramatic change. So they needed someone to take over. It was getting to the point that they needed to sell, and it's a nonprofit, and they didn't want to do that. Care Group was the parent company that was in partnership with the hospitals. They owned 6 hospitals. 2 only made money: New England Baptist and Mount Auburn Hospital. And this Care Group did not have a CEO. They just had a board of directors. There was no guidance, and all the failing hospitals had no help. There was no synergy and partnership within the hospitals because there was poor communication from Care Group. So overall, Care Group did not help the inefficiencies of BID. Paul Levy met with the search coordinator at BID and says that his only demand was to start on the job in January. He also had 2 demands on the second meeting, but the reason for the January thing was he wanted to become CEO before the Hunter report came out. This Hunter report was an analyzation of the hospital issues, and it came out with a plan to fix it. He wanted to be established in the workplace before it came out in mid-January. So the other 2, he established that what he wanted in the second time he met with the search coordinator. He basically sat down and said, listen, I need the board's too big. It needs to shrink about 15 to 18 members. It's too big. It was at 44 at the time. And we met with the search committee for the second time. He also asked for the board to step out every day with hospital work. That's not their job. And he reiterated again first week of January. And again, for Paul to do this, it showed leadership, in my opinion. And I'm saying this, it showed confidence. He throughout the interview, he oozed confidence. And to take over a company that potentially has a loss of $100 million on the way, you need confidence in your abilities. And also, I didn't see the other hiring people, possible potential candidates, but I know a lot of people would not meet the demands for the job that they're supposed to be hired for. That takes some guts, and it shows to me it's a little controversial, but you need that in a hospital that basically needs a whole remake. He was hired January 2nd. He met with the board chairman and the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The board was made up of basically BID board of directors and Care Group board of directors. Care Group, again, Care Group was there, BID was there, Attorney General was there, and this was the first time Paul Levy was told that they were going to sell it. BID was nonprofit. The Attorney General oversees all nonprofits in Mass. He believed that on market it'd be good value, and he believed if they waited 6 months, the value would drop, and they couldn't afford this. The only reason why he did this and he kept the company going and doing what they needed to do, the hospital, was Paul Levy. He said he trusted him and he trusted in his abilities. So hiring Paul Levy was a huge start to the turnaround. Paul had a eureka moment early on, which is funny because eureka moments aren't supposed to happen early on in this planning process. And he basically found the selling point. He knew that Care Group met with the president of Harvard, and the president of Harvard said, you're losing the affiliation with the hospital if you become for-profit. And this was a threat that was huge into Levy's favor because all the CEOs before him tried to push back from doctors and administrators. They had such a big pushback that they couldn't get anything done. They didn't want anything they wanted to do didn't work. So Levy had this major selling point. He had another selling point, that the for-profit was going to be open in the air. He was going to let it out. He was going to be honest from the start. From the start, he was going to be an honest CEO. And this set him up to basically lead in his way. But this 2 point of emphasis and the selling point, the eureka point, I think won him over. And I think it was such a good selling point that he wasn't going to fail. And it's very important that he had this selling point because doctors and administrators that we know are very stubborn. So it would have been hard to convince them, but them losing money, not being Harvard professors, wasn't going to hurt Paul Levy. He led through fear, not fear of himself, but fear of the for-profit status, and he used this very well. It wasn't a scare tactic. He was just open and honest. You know, fear can be honest. Honest sometimes is scary. So he was honest from the start, and it set him up. If he didn't have this fellow at some point, it would have been illegitimate. He would have came in and not had legitimacy. And we know as policy students, legitimacy is so important. If you don't have it, it's not going to work. People don't follow. So a lot of other information, he sent out an email basically saying how he was going to have to let 500, 700 people go. He also spoke with the Globe and Herald to spread the news. The interviewer asked him the question of would he fire nurses? And Paul knew this question wasn't about nurses. It was about, is the quality of care going to be the same? Sometimes people ask questions to set up answers. And in the Hunter report, it said they would have to fire 500, 700 people, but also 150 nurses. Paul said no. Now, Paul did not consult with anyone else when he said no. This was off the record. This was completely on his own. The steering committee was already setting up a plan to lay off these nurses. So Paul did this on his own. This was his first mistake, I think. And not because he didn't fire the nurses, because he was putting the quality of care as a niche, as an emphasis for this BID hospital. BID was in front of a bunch of Boston hospitals that really all have their own niche, and that was their niche, quality care. So he wasn't going to let go of the nurses. But he shouldn't have done this interview so early, because as a CEO, you can't have a question that you don't know the answer to yet, and the rest of your staff doesn't. It was a minor mistake. It didn't hurt him, but it could have. Also, Paul was great at emails. Throughout this whole process, he emailed his staff, he emailed his colleagues, and he emailed the overall hospital whenever a major thing happened. Any policy happened, he let them know. He didn't over-email them so they became junk. He emailed them informative responses and kept them up to date. Keeping them up to date gave them his trust. And it overall gave him trust and established himself in this hospital. And the trust, communication, accountability, all that was thrown out the window before he got there. And he already established that with these emails. He updated inflammation updates and also financial results. The recovery plan was at a crazy point because he fired people a week before the recovery plan was supposed to be announced. So they were kind of down, and the overall assessment of the place was down. So he sent the email to uplift spirits, but also he was holding forums to explain the recovery plan and in multiple time frames so people could all see it. He was bringing the plan to the board of directors, and he was going to send emails to staff about the recovery plan and letting them know they should answer a couple questions on the website. So this would really help him, and he made staff involved in the recovery plan. It wasn't just, this is a recovery plan. By saying it's on the website, answer questions for me, you're really informative, it gave everyone a sense of togetherness. And also he got a little lucky because the Patriots won the Super Bowl, coming from Iron Victory. So patience and a lot of luck in this. He was very patient, and he managed personalities well in this situation because he understood if the recovery plan was stuffed down their throats after all these firings, it wasn't a good message. The message would have been, we're doing what I'm doing and I'm selling house. But instead, he let them kind of sit, mourn a little bit, and now after the Patriots win, they got refired up and be positive and really looked at the recovery plan. So he timed it very well. And in this up-to-date media frenzy that we have, being up-to-date with forums and emails and communication is huge because he didn't want to have the recovery plan out before he gave it to the staff. That would show disloyalty. Also, the Patriots win again. Sometimes you need a little break as a manager, and getting this positive vibe after this negative vibe earlier before the recovery plan came out, of course, didn't hurt him. But break down the recovery plan, the intro was huge to him. The reason why, because we all know not every coworker and staff member is going to read the whole plan. They know the intro is the most important, and that's what people read. So he broke it down to three main parts. Environment and good healthcare. He wants the quality care. That's their niche. That's what's going to sell them. That's going to win the market. So he wanted to keep that. Also, how it differed and was the same with the Hunter report, because a lot of people assumed he was just going to do the Hunter report all over again. And also the analysis of why old plans failed and this one will work. He basically said, listen, this is how the old plans work. This is how my plan is going to work. And that showed some toughness to do that. And then, as that process went along, he became basically a persuader and a cheerleader. The board of directors needed a little persuading because this is all they had. And he showed that in the meeting. He came out and they asked for a contingency plan. So there's no contingency plan. This is final. And that showed a lot of toughness and confidence as a leader. So many leaders would have, kind of beat around the bush, and Paul didn't. He was honest, and he let him know there's no sugarcoating. This is our last shot. Also, Paul's job once the plan was out was to get to know the staff and tell them the information in person. That was his cheerleading point. He was going to all these different departments and being transparent, being there, being open, being communicative with every staff. His availability in those personal chats made them feel comfortable and regain trust in upper administration. And then Paul had to deal with the chief problem. The chief problem is a big problem because they were trying to get into day-to-day activities, and Paul didn't want that. Also, they weren't physicians or they weren't managers. They were researchers, and researchers should have no business trying to muddle day-to-day activities in a hospital. So during meetings with chiefs, no one would debate. This was a huge problem with Paul because he felt that that's where all the things would be out. But what they would do is try to get a consensus, and then they would undercut the consensus after the meeting. So this happened, and Paul stopped it by getting really angry with one of the chief of services and CC'd it to the rest of the chiefs that this is not how we act, this is bad behavior. There's a lot of communication issues, and we're stopping this right now. And Paul showed his leadership abilities, and he wasn't scared to back down, and all the rest of the chiefs applauded him for doing that. So it gave him a line in the sand. Again, he did the budget variance after this. And the budget variance, they didn't know how to explain, they didn't know how to do, and he wasn't having it. He basically said, I want this, and I want this at this time. So he was making even the highest administrators around him be accountable. He made a task force. These task forces were from different branches that didn't like talking to each other, but when they were put together, it made them communicate and made them reach an agreement. And it was an important part of policy implementation because you need the right people on the job. It was physicians, non-physicians, and clinical administrators all together. He didn't want the chiefs involved. He didn't want the CEO or CFO involved. He wanted the people to do it. He doesn't micromanage. He believes in accountability, transparency, and trust. And he believed in them, and it gave him confidence. And he had a huge disagreement with COO about this early on. The COO didn't understand why she wasn't on the steering committee. Paul explained to her that he could not do this job with the staff for all of them. She was way too controlling and direction-minded, while he was an empowering and supporting type of leader. And that's what he wanted, and she couldn't see eye to eye with him in this. And early on, a lot of doctors and administrators said to fire her, but he didn't want that because he wanted to establish that he makes those decisions, not someone else telling him what to do. He made a kitchen cabinet with the major department heads because the cabinet was so big and 44 people, it was too much. So he made a small kitchen cabinet, and those people didn't get along. So it would have been a healthy debate to fix the hospital. It was a great move by Paul because big cabinets just don't work. And that's why he wanted to shrink it, but he knew that was going to take a long time. And also, he got the presidents of hospitals together to meet with Care Group. And this was important because they needed to get communication down. To me, he was the biggest hospital, and he kind of acted like the New York Yankees. We're going to get the 4 other major networks. We're going to go to the MLB office and fix communication issues. It's the same thing here. He was the biggest hospital. He was going to get it done. Paul also expanded during this time. He understood that public perception was huge, so he bought the hospital in Needham. He got Pickle involved to do a little affiliation with them, and also leased out a building to Manual College. He knew that public perception was so big, and Needham was a wealthy area. So in a wealthy area, there's big voices, and that was huge for him. Also, in the smart flaws in testing slide in this, there was a huge fall in billing. A split bill was more Medicare rules expensive than a global bill, so he wanted to test this. People were telling him not to do the departments that were going to say no, but he wasn't scared to mix it up. He did a department that was easy and a department that was hard. He felt that more flaws would come up in the harder one, and they want to see the flaws first off in hand. And this took a lot of guts and showed a lot of toughness. Care Group had some more issues. In April, they closed down a hospital by replacing the board with their home board, which is that freaked out the rest of the hospitals. So Levy stepped up and did a divorce plan, a dissolution plan from the Care Group. The 3 are listed right there. But I do think the problem with Levy on this one was he wasn't all in this. He was 20% in this, and he didn't like to do these meetings. So in my opinion, he should have rushed the issue because there was 2 hospitals making money. He was too about what his hospital was about instead of looking at the whole picture. I think he got a little cocky on this one, and the October 1st deadline to solving this issue was way too long in advance. They're talking about this in April, and he wants a deadline of October 1st. It just wasn't good enough for the other 2, and I don't blame him for what happened. Also, big was accountability. I keep saying accountability. That's what his major style was. The best example was a message he sent to the CEO and CFO. He sent a message basically attacking the progress that's gone on, a message to step up. He basically told them to step up, give me information I need right now. The CFO complied, the COO didn't. But it shows to other people that he's going to hold everyone accountable, not just under him, people that are just as high as him, or if not on a little lower level. He also stuck to the plan. He reduced the board of directors from 44 to 18, included 2 members of the care group, himself, chief of surgery and medicine, and representatives from the physician practice plan. This helped them be honest and transparent. It showed that he wasn't playing around, he was sticking to his plan, and it didn't matter who he was firing or letting go. He was going to do it for the better of the hospital, and that showed a great message and honest. The firing of the CEO, I learned more from her than actually him. Because I think he was very professional. He basically said, our managerial styles don't work, and we're going to have to let you go. But however you want to spin this firing, you want to say you want to engage in another matter, or you're taking a leave of absence, however you want to do it. And she was very unprofessional and childish. She basically left the office and left the next day and basically told everyone she got fired. So Paul tried to handle this in a professional manner, and she didn't. So I agree with Paul on that one, that you should have. And I also learned that a lot from Paul, but you don't have to be hostile in a firing. They just didn't see eye to eye. And the chief of orthopedics got fired, and he loved it. He didn't want to be there anymore. So it shows his proactiveness worked, because he had a guy that didn't want to be a chief. He also had to manage egos. They were doing better. First cash flow positive in that quarter. They had the first positive game in 5 years. Paul had to slow them down and say, listen, we're 6 miles into a marathon. Also, he wanted to explain what cash flow positive was compared to and still being a deficit. And they had 350 people show up in 2 days. So this showed that the trust was there with Paul, and all these informatives were actually working, and now this hospital was running as an organization, and they were running smoothly. He also sent out 3 memos in the month of June into July updating staff. The first one was on capacity planning. He understood there was overcapacity and lack of beds. He understood nursing, the memo number 2. Boston's highly competitive. There's a lot of recruiting and bonuses and other stuff like that. So he decided to hold a town hall style forum with nurses to ask their feedback on what they need. And these memos were so important because they knew what was going on, and they wanted to know that he knew what was going on. Because a lot of times there's a disconnect between what's going on the floor and what's going on above. So Paul kind of put them together and said, listen, I know what's going on. I'm trying to fix it. And that's important in an organization. He hired a new CEO on July 17th. It was the interim. I love this one because Paul basically said, whatever you need, whatever price is the right price for me. He understood how valuable this man was to the organization. He understood that there was no price, and he wasn't going to go hire a CEO less of them. They needed the best guy available, and sometimes the money gives a better result. And I learned a lot from that message. More care group stuff. He had to deal with Mount Auburn leaving the care group after a 5-hour meeting saying they weren't going to leave it. And they kind of left him in the dry, and they found out through media. So they decided to drop the dissolution and let them pay the exit fee that they have to pay on October 1st to leave. And I think this was a loss for Paul, in my opinion. I think he did tremendous, but the whole care group situation, he was a little too confident, and he tried to throw his weight around a little too much. I think he was the biggest hospital, but I learned the valuable lesson that sometimes the big companies have to understand that if there's other people make money and you're not, you got to meet their needs and your needs. You can't do just yours. So the final results were better than budgeted. In the last 5 months, it was 2 profitable months. Paul Levy set performance objectives after all this and wanted people to meet the expectations. I learned that control micromanagement isn't need to be successful. You can give the power to the people. He was transparent. He was communicative. He was honest. He put people in positions to win. Managing is a lot like being a coach. Your voice needs to be heard, and that happens through honesty, accountability, and demanding to be great. He demanded people to be accountable. He demanded people to do their job. He was proactive, and he was always involved. Paul Levy emailed, sent memos, held all kinds of positions accountable. He understood his name was on it. He was making sure it wasn't failing. I think that was a great message to learn. He was so transparent. He was always around, meeting with small groups, meeting with the last guy on the team, and that's what's important. He was a very good manager of personalities, of egos, and everything that deals with people. He was a good people person, and he knew how to lead. And I think that's what made this successful. I think the things he did were very obvious and needed to be done, but there wasn't someone that wanted to step to the plate and do them. So I give Paul a lot of credit. I learned a lot of leadership style things with him, and I learned it doesn't take a lot. It just takes effort, it takes confidence, and it takes trusting people around you to be successful. So this is the last slide, and I really appreciate this semester. It's been great, Professor, and have a good summer. Thank you.